Jonathan Roumie entered the Gilded Lantern in the heart of New York, dressed in simple, wrinkled clothes, as if he had just come from an ordinary day in the city that never sleeps. He chose a discreet table, trying to go unnoticed amidst the glow of giant crystal chandeliers illuminating the space. But before he even had the chance to place his order, a waitress approached with a look of disdain and an arrogant posture. "Sir, are you sure you can afford to be here?" she snapped, her tone laced with irony, loud enough for other patrons to turn their heads. What happens next not only leaves everyone in the restaurant stunned, but reveals a truth that changes everything. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow at 12:30 p.m., we have another special story for you. The Gilded Lantern was a symbol of sophistication in Manhattan, located on one of the city's most prestigious avenues. Its wide windows offered a view of streets illuminated by luxurious neon signs and slow-moving sports cars. Inside, every detail was carefully curated to impress. The Gilded Lantern wasn't just a restaurant. It was a destination for those who wanted to be seen and admired. Madison, one of the Gilded Lantern's most experienced waitresses, moved confidently through the dining room, wearing a rehearsed smile. Her immaculate bun and tailored uniform reinforced her image of efficiency and control. Working there wasn't just a job, it was a privilege. At least, that's how Madison saw it. Being a waitress at one of New York's most renowned restaurants was something she mentioned with pride whenever she had the chance. But Madison had another side, an exaggerated pride that often spilled over into arrogance. She had a peculiar talent for quickly judging patrons, mentally categorizing them based on their clothing, demeanor, and appearance. "Some people just don't belong here," she often thought. The restaurant's glass door swung open smoothly, and a man walked in. He wore worn-out jeans, a simple shirt, and a jacket that looked comfortable but lacked any hint of luxury branding. His presence was understated, almost invisible, as he calmly made his way to the reception desk. Jonathan Roumie wasn't a man who enjoyed flaunting his wealth. Despite being one of Hollywood's rising stars, known for an iconic role, his reserved demeanor stood in stark contrast to the extravagant sparkle of New York's high society. And at that moment, he seemed like just another ordinary customer. Madison was busy at the reception desk, discussing a VIP reservation with another staff member when she noticed Jonathan. She abruptly stopped talking, her gaze narrowing as she assessed him with barely concealed disdain. He didn't look anything like the typical Gilded Lantern clientele. Without hiding her reaction, she tilted her head and gave him a slow once-over, her eyes lingering on his scuffed boots. "Good evening," she said in a dry tone, forcing a smile that disappeared almost instantly. "How can I help you?" "I'd like a table, please," Jonathan said, his tone polite and calm. Madison raised an eyebrow as if she had just heard something absurd. Her expression seemed to ask, "How dare he?" She crossed her arms, her smile vanishing entirely. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This is a very exclusive restaurant." Jonathan continued to smile, unfazed. "Yes, this is the place," he replied calmly. Madison let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head. "Okay, just a moment. I need to check something." She turned quickly, not bothering to maintain any semblance of politeness, and headed to the reception office. There, she accessed the reservation system, typing his name with exaggerated flair. When nothing came up, she rolled her eyes and returned to the dining area, visibly annoyed. "Well, as I suspected, you don't have a reservation," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "We do have a few tables available. But just so you know, this isn't a casual dining spot." Jonathan remained unbothered, his calm demeanor seemingly irritating her even more. "I'd like to dine here," he replied, his tone unchanged. Madison let out an exaggerated sigh, grabbing a menu with an abrupt motion. All right, but I'll need to seat you in a suitable area. Follow me. She began walking briskly through the dining room, without looking back to see if he was following. When they reached the farthest, least appealing corner of the restaurant, she dropped the menu on the table with an audible thud. Here you go. This table is perfect for you, she said in a falsely sweet tone. If you need anything, let me know, but only if it's necessary. Okay. Jonathan maintained his slight smile, ignoring her tone. Thank you. I'm sure this will be an interesting experience. As Madison walked away, she muttered under her breath, loud enough for a nearby couple to hear. He won't last 5 minutes here. Bet he'll leave as soon as he opens the menu. Across the dining room, Jonathan calmly opened the menu, his eyes scanning the options without haste. The live music continued to fill the air, but something about his posture was intriguing, as if nothing could disturb his serenity. From the other side of the room, Madison watched with a smug smile, certain that he would soon ask for the check and disappear. Madison led Jonathan through the dining room with quick, mechanical steps, not even bothering to look at him. Instead of choosing a table in the center, where the golden light from the chandeliers highlights the elegance of the environment, she took him to the most hidden and poorly lit corner of the restaurant. It was a table near the kitchen, where the sound of dishes being washed and the muffled chatter of staff created an atmosphere far removed from the rest of the dining room. Here you go. This table should do, she said, dropping the menu on the table carelessly. I think you'll feel comfortable here. It's more private. Jonathan glanced at the table and then at Madison, his slight smile unwavering. Thank you, he replied calmly. She crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes, as if trying to figure out whether he was being sarcastic or simply clueless. You're welcome, she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Just so you know, we usually reserve these tables for special cases, but since we don't have anything booked tonight, you can have it. Spinning on her heels. She left before he could respond. When Madison returned to the table to take his order, her behavior became even more cruel. She pulled out her notepad with an exaggerated motion and cast a cold glance at Jonathan. Have you decided what you'd like? She asked, not bothering to hide the boredom in her voice. Or would you like a recommendation? Jonathan looked at the menu and calmly pointed to one of the most expensive main courses. I'd like to try this one. Madison stifled a laugh, covering her mouth with one hand as if trying to hold back a snide comment. Oh, of course. The Rossini steak, she said with a condescending tone. A classic dish. Just to confirm, sir, you do know this costs $350, right? Jonathan nodded, his calm demeanor unchanging. Yes, it sounds wonderful. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a malicious smile. All right then. Just to make sure there aren't any misunderstandings later, I suggest you double-check the prices. We wouldn't want anyone to have unpleasant surprises. Jonathan remained unfazed, which seemed to irritate her even more. I'm certain, he said calmly. Madison let out a dramatic sigh, as if she were doing him a huge favor, and jotted down the order. Very well, as you wish, but I'll warn you, our chef prefers dishes like this to be enjoyed by those who truly appreciate fine dining. I hope it meets your expectations. She spun on her heels again, but before leaving, she stopped and turned back. Oh, and one more thing. The minimum tip expected here is 20%. Keep that in mind while you enjoy. As he waited, Jonathan seemed entirely unaffected by the discomfort Madison tried to create. He glanced around the dining room, admiring the decor and the pianist's performance. However, Madison, convinced she needed to teach a lesson to the customer she believed had no right to be there, decided to delay his order. Instead of promptly taking it to the kitchen, she made a point of prioritizing the patrons she deemed more important. She stopped to chat with an elegant couple in the center of the dining room, laughed exaggeratedly at a joke told by another guest, and even delivered a cocktail to a table that wasn't hers. In an attempt to provoke him further, she repeatedly walked past his table, pretending to be busy. Every time he glanced in her direction, she averted her eyes and quickened her steps. It was during one of these passes that her eyes caught a small detail she had previously missed: a simple, unadorned wooden cross hanging from a leather cord around his neck. A smirk of understanding crossed her face. "Oh, one of those," she muttered to a co-worker who was trying to ignore her. "All piety and no purse." The co-worker, a young man named Ben, just shook his head and moved away, not wanting any part of it. Madison's disdain now had a new, sharper edge. She saw Jonathan not just as poor, but as a hypocrite. She walked over to a table occupied by a flashy businessman and his companion, both dripping with designer labels. "Mr. Davenport, another bottle of the Dom Perignon," she cooed, her voice a syrupy sweet melody. "Of course, Madison, you know me so well," the man boomed, winking at her. She laughed, a sound that was both loud and artificial, ensuring it carried across the room to Jonathan's corner. Meanwhile, at a nearby table, an elderly couple, Arthur and Eleanor, had begun to observe the unfolding drama. Arthur, a man with neatly combed white hair and a sharp, intellectual gaze, frowned. "That's the third time she's walked past that young man's table to dote on the Davenports," he whispered to his wife. Eleanor placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Now, Arthur, let's not get involved." But her own eyes were filled with concern. "Still, it is quite disgraceful. The poor man has been nothing but polite." Finally, Madison decided it was time to serve the appetizer. She let it sit under the warming lamp for an extra 5 minutes before retrieving it. When she arrived at Jonathan's table, she set the plate down with a clatter that was just a little too loud to be accidental. "Here is your appetizer," she announced. "I hope you enjoy it, or at least know what you're eating." Jonathan looked at the appetizer, then up at her, his calm expression unwavering. "Thank you." Leaning in slightly, Madison lowered her voice, her words dripping with false concern. "You know, patience is a virtue, isn't it? I'm sure someone like you understands that." She glanced pointedly at the wooden cross. "Some people think faith alone can get them a good meal. Here, we prefer a credit card." For the first time, a flicker of something new appeared in Jonathan's eyes. It wasn't anger or embarrassment, but a keen, analytical focus. He was no longer just a serene customer. He was a judge observing a trial. "My faith and my credit are both in good standing. Thank you," he replied, his voice still quiet but now carrying an undeniable weight. Frustrated that she couldn't elicit the flustered reaction she craved, Madison stormed away, muttering to Ben at the bar. "He's putting on an act. He's going to ask for the check as soon as he realizes he can't afford the main course." Ben just polished a glass, his back turned to her. "Maybe you should just leave him alone. Madison, he's a customer." "A customer?" she scoffed. "Ben, this is the Gilded Lantern, not a soup kitchen. We have standards. Standards he clearly doesn't meet." Across the room, Jonathan took a slow bite of his appetizer. He caught the eye of Arthur, the elderly man, who gave him a subtle, encouraging nod. Jonathan responded with a slight, appreciative smile. The appetizer was good, but he could tell it had been left under the lamp too long, the edges slightly dry. It was a small, petty act of sabotage, but it was one more detail he filed away. The quiet corner of the restaurant was no longer just a place of neglect. It was becoming a stage, and Madison, in her blind arrogance, had no idea she was the main performer in a play she didn't write, and the man she was trying to humiliate was, in fact, the director. Madison's frustration was boiling over. Her target remained infuriatingly calm, and the sympathetic glances he was receiving from other tables were beginning to feel like accusations against her. Determined to provoke a reaction, she returned to his table after he finished his main course, her approach anything but professional. "So," she began, her voice loud enough for several nearby tables to hear, "I hope your experience has been enlightening. After all, it's not every day we get to serve those who walk by faith and not by sight." She smiled, a cruel, triumphant smirk, her eyes again flicking down to the wooden cross on his chest. The dining room, already tense, fell into a hush. Arthur, the elderly man, placed his napkin firmly on his table, preparing to stand. His wife, Eleanor, looked mortified. The businessman, Mr. Davenport, who had been enjoying Madison's fawning attention, now looked uncomfortable with the public nature of her cruelty. Before Arthur could rise, the restaurant manager, a tall, impeccably dressed man named Mr. Sterling, noticed the sudden silence and the dozens of eyes fixed on one corner of his establishment. Sensing a crisis, he began to move swiftly from his post near the entrance. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Sterling asked, his voice a smooth baritone meant to placate. His eyes first went to Madison, then to the customer she was looming over. As his gaze fell upon Jonathan Roumie, his professional composure shattered. His face went pale. Mr. Roumie," the manager stammered, his tone shifting from authoritative to reverent in a heartbeat. He completely ignored Madison. "I had no idea you were visiting us tonight. I am so sorry for the delay in recognizing you." Madison froze, the blood draining from her face. Her mind raced, trying to connect the dots. Roumie, he knows him. What is happening? Jonathan held the manager's gaze for a moment before turning his attention back to Madison. His voice was still calm, but it now possessed a quiet authority that commanded the entire room. "Let's talk about the service. Shall we?" The silence was now absolute. I didn't know," Madison whispered, her arrogance finally cracking. "I mean, I thought..." "Thought what?" "Madison." "Mr. Sterling cut her off, his voice low and trembling with fury. "That this customer, who happens to be the primary investor who saved this restaurant from bankruptcy, didn't deserve the same respect as anyone else." A collective gasp went through the room. Madison looked as if she had been struck by lightning. The owner," she choked out, unable to comprehend. "It shouldn't matter who I am," Jonathan said, breaking the silence. His words were not a condemnation, but a statement of fact. "It shouldn't matter what I wear." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "And it certainly shouldn't matter what I believe." He calmly continued. "You delayed my order, you served my appetizer cold, you made snide remarks about my appearance, and then you told me, 'Some people think faith alone can get them a good meal. Here, we prefer a credit card.' Is that the standard of hospitality at the Gilded Lantern, Mr. Sterling?" Every word was a nail in Madison's coffin. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Mr. Sterling, her eyes pleading. The manager's face was a mask of cold fury. He turned to Madison. Your behavior has been a disgrace to this establishment and to every person working in it. Pack your things. You are no longer employed here. But please, she begged. There is nothing to discuss, Mr. Sterling said with finality. Leave, now. With a choked sob, Madison turned and fled through the service doors, avoiding the silent, judgmental stares of every patron and staff member she passed. Jonathan took a deep breath and slowly stood up, addressing the silent room. My apologies for the interruption to your evening, he said. He then turned to Mr. Sterling. I would like to meet with the entire team after we close. There are some important things we need to discuss. Of course, Mr. Roumie, it will be done, the manager said, relief and admiration mixing in his expression. Later that night, in the empty dining room, the staff stood gathered as Jonathan stood at the center. We all make mistakes, he began, his voice steady. But today was not a mistake. It was a choice to judge, to belittle, and to exclude. This restaurant was founded to be a sanctuary, a place where everyone could feel welcomed. Its value is not in these chandeliers or the price of the wine. Its value is in the dignity we afford every single person who walks through that door. That is our brand. That is our only standard. He looked at each of them, his gaze firm but compassionate. From this moment on, we will be a place defined not by exclusivity, but by kindness, not by judgment, but by acceptance. That is the promise of the Gilded Lantern, and it's a promise I expect every one of you to keep. He simply nodded, and as he stepped out of the restaurant, the streets of New York sparkled under the city lights. He paused briefly, reflecting that true strength isn't found in what you own, but in how you treat others, especially when you have nothing to gain. Thank you for following this story. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If you'd like more inspiring stories about justice and resilience, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll be back tomorrow with another must-see story you won't want to miss.